Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don and I'm a consultant in life sciences. We focus mainly in on the consulting side on pharma, biotech, and medical device companies and helping the companies work on their strategy, people, process, and technology, really focusing it so that their companies can grow. I've also started a weekly series. I'll bring up that page in just a second again, and there's a link at the very bottom, which essentially is thescalingmethod.com/thoughts at scale. But essentially, what this is it's a weekly series for companies that are looking to scale their organization, and we're covering key topics that you would focus in on to try and scale your particular organization. So with that, let me bring up our guest. We're having back Oksana Bovt. Oksana is the founder of Theoria Creative, an agency that develops unique fundraising materials that enable biotech and life science clients to clearly and succinctly articulate their unique message and value, raising funds, soliciting partnerships, pitching at roadshows, or presenting to prospective buyers. So with that, Oksana, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to cover today's topic. So the reason why you're back, obviously, is to talk a little bit more about scientific mechanisms of action, and we'll talk a little bit more about the work that you do. So yeah, welcome.
Yes, happy to share some knowledge we have. Yeah.
I appreciate that. So maybe it would be good for anybody that hasn't watched the previous episode if you could just talk a little bit about yourself and who Theoria Creative is.
Yes, of course. I guess quick background on me is that I actually have very diverse background in science and literature and advertising, which allowed me to start my own business years ago. We're in business, I think, around 13, 14 years now. And we work with life science companies. We really help them build the story that helps them get invested, and we collaborate with venture capitalists, with investment bankers, with their portfolio companies. Just really make sure that executive suite is ready to tell the best story they have to their investors.
I mean, that's definitely something that's needed because I feel like so many of the companies that I interact with, they have great science. Now they just need to be able to tell a great story around that science, and that's where I hear Theoria Creative, really fitting that niche.
Yes, looks like we found our little niche. That's true. A lot of companies that we work with, they, like you said, they have great scientists, very notable scientists sometimes, and groundbreaking science. But gosh, talking about it is a challenge. Yes.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about some of the key milestones in terms of your journey to create Theoria Creative? What sort of, brought you to this point?
I think never give up. That's why we're here. Because developing a company is difficult. You always run into certain problems. And for us, it was pretty much sensing and following where the industry was taking us. We started just like any other brand agency, which didn't last long at all because we realized that people beautiful images don't really help people if they don't have a message behind. And this is what prompt us to focus really on the story and the message behind it, and then obviously package it along with the very nice graphics. Then it's a good package to offer. So for us, the milestones were just pretty much don't give up and keep exploring and follow where the need is, and we found the need.
Yeah. So important. I think this idea in terms of pivoting is something that's familiar with any entrepreneur overall. But I also think inside of life sciences, quite a few of the companies that that we would work with, they're constantly pivoting as well. So trying to really sense where where do they need help is not always an easy thing. How did you stay in touch with that? How did what was the best way that you found to really sense where the clients were going, where they needed help?
Their feedback mostly, because they would always tell us you're really great at such and such things, and so you start thinking, I thought to do this, I kind of like this, but they say we're really good at that. And so why don't we start kind of trying to maybe combine or look more into what's needed? And this is how we stayed afloat for so many years and actually in great demand, thankfully. So
Yeah, and then what types of clients do you normally work with? I seem to recall you saying before that you've worked with investors as well. So, I mean, even outside of, just strict life sciences, you also worked with the investment side as well. Is that correct?
it's correct, but mostly we focus on their portfolio companies, right? And so the sweet spot for us is late preclinical, early clinical companies, which is pretty much a constant raising of funds, going public or raising private funds. So this is a sweet spot for us, and investors that we work with, they usually invest in these companies, and once they've done their first round on investments, it's never ending. They need the next one. And so investors want to make sure that the story is solid, strong, and the next round will be successful. That's where we come in and we help them fine tune the story. Sometimes we even help improve communication between investors and the executive team, because sometimes there are two different directions, but we talk to both and we find out how to align them, and that definitely helps them see eye to eye and raise funds successfully and achieve their business goals.
Yeah, I feel like so much of this, the process as well, just of working through what the story would be, would help you, really refine that end idea that you're going for with your company as well. And I mean, I just beyond like, what you might produce in the end, I just see it being beneficial for the company as well.
Yes, and oftentimes when we work with clients, even our questions help them really change their mindset and see clearly where they're going. And oftentimes, sometimes they come to us and they say, "Oh, we need it very quickly. Let's just start and move on." And then we start asking questions. They're like, "It's good questions. We need to think it about it internally." And so then it takes the slower process, and then, but they end up in a better spot at the end, and we usually have a very good feedback.
Yeah. Can you share with us an example of a project that either was particularly challenging or one that was rewarding?
Most of our work is rewarding because we can see how our clients' eyes lit up when they see their new story. And sometimes they say, "Oh, wow, is that us?" um, and then obviously we're very busy, we're not marketing ourselves at all, but when I see on LinkedIn that one of the clients that we worked a month or a few months ago, they finally raised, so that just makes me very happy. It means that we put them on the right track and they were able to succeed and achieve what they wanted. So we have almost all our stories are like that. The challenge for us is different. I think when you love your work and you're good at it, it's not a challenge. The challenge
Mhm.
is when you struggle to create something, and we usually don't have that. Sometimes the challenge is if the client is not aligned to raise, for example, but investors are keen for them to do that, and so we kind of have to work with the company and move them ahead, help them, like, look, you're ready to raise, and they're like, I don't know. And so that's the difficulties, that's the challenges, but other than that, everything is more or less just focused on rewards.
Yeah, so important. And then let's talk a little bit about scientific mechanisms of action. I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that, but MOA. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about scientific mechanisms of action. For anybody that's not familiar, could you explain what they are?
Of course, every life science company has a certain mechanism that they developed. It's their scientific hypothesis, how their drug works. And so, pretty much, how the drug works is the scientific mechanism of action. And this is a secret sauce, so to speak, for investors to understand what differentiates one company from another. Obviously, it comes with the data that needs to support it and proof of concept and such, but it all starts with the science that differentiates one company from another.
And so when you are looking at this, I mean, normally are you interacting with people in marketing or on the science side?
We normally work with the executive suite, and if the science is too intricate, then we go to scientists in the company because we need to figure it out, understand the value of it. So pretty much we look at the science, but from the marketing and business perspective, and see how we can talk about it, what we can relate it to, so generalists, investors could understand it faster and simpler and see the value.
And how, I mean, I guess I would guess that the knowledge gap somewhat, I mean, in terms of the investors that I've run into, right, there's a full gamut of investors. Some of them will have no pharmaceutical background and then want to invest, which is, kind of a challenge, oftentimes, kind of a red flag for me. And then the other side is, companies that have people that are very in depth in terms of certain aspects, but they may not understand everything. And so how hard is it in terms of thinking of that last end audience and how you're going to have to explain things to them?
So usually we run our idea by our clients first, right? And if I see that they understand their own science better, we're already succeeding. And oftentimes, when we work with the executive suite, we sometimes have someone who are not scientists. They could be investor relations people, they could be business side people, right? And when they look at it and say, oh, I now understand what we do a lot better, then this is one success already. And when it comes to investors, we usually try to focus on generalists because you never know whom you're talking to. Plus, also investors, they're not always specific to a certain therapeutic area. They're rather specific to certain stage or certain mechanisms of the modalities. And so making sure that you can clearly communicate the scientific idea always helps speed up the process and get the clarity, the message through.
And then in terms of I guess in terms of the process that you go through, how do you take somebody from, they understand their science to, having something that actually clearly explains the scientific mechanisms of action?
Oftentimes, the way we start is obviously clients reach out to us and they send us a slide where we have hundreds of lines with the arrows from one circle to another. And so this is the pathway. And so you're looking at this and you're like, great. And so, what is this? Is this how the disease works? Is this how your drug works? And what I noticed over the years that for some reason, scientists, they tend to put everything into one pathway and then talk it through, which makes it super complicated. So what I mean by everything is that they try to explain how the pathway would work normally, how the pathway works when it's let's say mutated pathway, and then how their drug would interact with it to normalize it, right? Something like that. And so it's all in one cluster of lines and circles. And obviously, this is not self explanatory at all. And even if you walk someone through this, it's really hard to follow. So, this is where we start cluster of science. And then our process is that we usually put this aside. We connect on the call with the executive team, sometimes with scientists, and we simply start asking questions. Okay, let's start step by step. Step one, step two, and so on. And then out of that, we help them pretty much just distill a very clear picture of how this works and what we need to show, which often actually end up maybe in more slides, but the talk track that you go through with it is much faster because it's self-explanatory in the image.
So important as well. And I mean, I've been a party of watching some of the pitch decks continue to come together. And what I've seen as well is that what leads to that end message is really the presentation after presentation. Oftentimes the scientific team winds up in a call where they're having to explain all of these things as fast as possible instead
Right.
of saying, look, I mean, it may not be possible to cover everything. We'll cover, this part today. And then if you want additional follow-ups, we may have to, do additional calls because I feel
That
like there's oftentimes so rushed. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to interrupt, but this is actually the challenge because scientists can't drop any of the single little detail of the pathway, even if that pathway goes all the way to the other end that they never interact with. They
Mhm.
still feel the need to explain it, and that's why we always see the cluster first, and then we try to prioritize and actually understand who are the main, as we call them, actors of the process, right? What do we need to focus on? What do we need to explain rather than details that can be left unnoticed?
Yeah, I would imagine picking that apart probably isn't initially easy, but it also is part of a good learning process, I would envision, because having to do it, you're having to kind of untangle that cluster more or less.
And we having a blast every time we do that.
Well, that's really good, and I guess the at the end of the day, do you feel like generalists really get a better grasp of MOAs at the end?
I think so, especially with the images. When we do illustrations or animations, it becomes self explanatory, especially if our clients are pitching and they want to leave the deck behind, and that can show the clear differentiation of their science in a quick, simple 3 frames of illustrations. I think that's a big value to the company. And we often create animations that they just leave on the website so investors always can go back, click, and watch a very short animation of how this mechanism works and what's differentiating about it. And I think that's very helpful to our clients, and we receive very good feedback.
And then in terms of the companies that you start with, could they be at seed stage?
They do, but when they see they have very limited budget, and so usually we tell them let's not do animation because that's a more expensive process. But then we just help them with the illustrative process. We illustrate the same mechanism frame by frame so they can use it in their pitch decks.
And then the output oftentimes, if I understand you correctly, one is a pitch deck, and then secondly could be animations if they're contracted for that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I mean, I guess also because we normally see both non-confidential and confidential decks, do you work on both, or do you always work on the confidential one and just strip out things to create the non-confidential one?
Oh,
Okay.
yes. It makes it easier that way.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I've only seen it that way, so I never know. If anybody else takes a different path, right, for creating the
Well,
non-confidential.
if they want to present a good story, it's best for us to know the full story,
Hmm.
right? And it's usually a confidential story. And then we know what we cannot disclose. And then we already have all the materials and graphics done and messages constructed. We just know which one we need to leave behind for the non confidential deck. So that's easier that way.
And then could you explain an example of a well articulated MOA that made a significant difference in fundraising?
I guess that's why companies come to us, right? We do the MOA and then they take it to the next level. And MOAs, the animations are usually the requests we get from the public companies because they feel like their ongoing investors spend more time on the websites when they're public. And so they want to have something that communicates that message. And animations are usually for public companies. I think for private companies, we're mostly focused on illustrative mechanisms to help them explain the message. But I would say most of our clients are quite successful in raising, and I guess we kind of play a small role in that.
Are any of these materials also used in like any of the poster displays or anything like that go to the conferences?
Yeah, mechanism of actions, and when we work on the deck, we create a style, oftentimes style that they didn't have within their brand, and so then that style translates into all other materials that they use, including the conferences and scientific posters and such.
And then in terms of steps that people could take with you in terms of getting started, could you explain some of the initial steps that companies could take in terms of getting started with Theoria?
I can actually share just three steps, it's not necessarily get started with us. It's in general, when you're a company that needs to explain your mechanism of action in a more clear way. I can share 3 steps, simple steps to keep in mind when you figuring how to communicate that. And so one first step is pretty much just outline your step by step process. And when I say this is that, keep in mind that a lot of scientific mechanisms, they affect several levels of the body: molecular level, cellular level, tissue level. Make sure that whatever you explain about the mechanism, you're very clear which level you're addressing at this point. So what's happening on the molecular level will lead to what happens on the cellular level, and then in return it will lead what happens on the tissue level. So just make sure which one you focus in at the time. And then also identify the names of all the entities, and I call them players, right? So you have a certain inhibitor, for example, that targets certain receptor, for example, and that receptor resides in a certain cell, and that cell is in a certain organ, right? So all those are your major players, actors in your story. So you need to make sure you address them all and you explain what they do. So this is more or less first step by step process. And then you break it down into a series of steps for each level. For example, how your inhibitor might connect to a receptor, and then what does the cell do when this happens. So all those steps. So this is one approach. Second step that I also recommend our clients doing is that forget about PowerPoint and everything. Just sit down, take a piece of paper and write one paragraph that describes every step of your mechanism, right? What happens during that step? Just descriptively in your own words. Don't even think about organizing it on the slide or on the page. So that also helps you build and clarify your story. And then the last advice that I have, the final step, is that what we found over the years that really helps our clients is that not only focusing on the mechanism of your drug, how it works, because, well, it's great that it explains, that you can explain what it does, but then if you don't know how it should be, or if you don't know how it is in the disease, so what are you trying to fix? More or less, then it's really hard to value what your drug can do. And so, what we recommend to do is just make sure to compare and highlight. So, compare your mechanism of the drug with the healthy state, how it should be in the body, or compare it with the unhealthy state, what you're trying to fix, so they can see a comparison and the difference in the pathway or in the tissue or cell actions, how this affects the body. And so that way you provide in the comparison and they can clearly see with their own eyes what's happening. So you don't need to spend that much time convincing them that this is important, because they will already see the difference. So those are 3 steps.
Yeah, it's funny that where you started as well in terms of, just in terms of making sure that you're talking about the same thing at all, always within that, same section, whether it's tissue or cell. The when I was having my book edited, it was a similar sort of process. So that, where, if the tense changed or the individual that was targeted in the paragraph changed, oftentimes the editor would have comments in those sections. And so I'm hearing some of that same sort of dialogue as well in terms of this example, my more simplistic mind again at work.
Yeah, but it's surprising how, scientists, they see it through. For them, there is no boundaries, right? But for the a new person to listen to it, you're totally lost. Wait a second, is it on the cell level? Is it a receptor? What is it? And so, yeah, just take your time, explain every actor, explain the levels you're in.
So important. And then in terms of the best way to get started with your company, could you explain, how companies normally get started?
Usually we work by referral. So usually it's a referral, sometimes from our existing clients, but mostly from investors or investment bankers that we work with. But if you feel like you need to talk to us, our website is theoriacreative.com, and you can always drop us a note there, and we'll respond and schedule a call.
That would be great. And then, do you have any final advice for life science companies that are looking to improve their communication?
Always assume investors are, should I say, not smart.
Mm,
Because the thing is, investors have very little time, and they go through many pitches in one day. And if you want to stand out, make it so simple for them. Don't assume they know everything. They do know a lot, but don't assume they know your point of view. So make sure you communicate very clear, simple, and straightforward. And obviously, good images help.
Yeah, and one of the things I heard, I would love to hear your perspective on this as well. One of the things that I heard very recently as well was that for companies that have, let's say, multiple things that they could treat in the end, what is the most prevalent is, really the thing that most investors are looking for now, rather than having a company that has two or three things that they could go after. The investors are wanting more focus right now, especially just to know that their dollars are not being defocused in research across three different possible indications as a research project.
Yes, so usually if that's the case, you need to try to get into investor mindset, and you need to understand what do they see in your scientific idea, what's the potential. They usually would go for the biggest market. They would go for the data that is more aligned, that you generated, right? So if you have three, four different potential hypothetical targets that you can go after, you obviously have data, and some data will be stronger than others, right? So they will see that. And obviously the market trends, right? Because, stock market, and then regulatory changes, it all affects it. So you need to pretty much weigh in all the pros and cons. And I guess when you're pitching, we usually help our clients to focus too, because you need to go through the fundraise. Once you have money, you can figure out what you want to do next. But how do you get to the money? You need to have a clear, crystal clear message.
Mm. Yeah, it's so important, and that focus isn't something that a lot of people, that I've talked to anyway, that they have. I mean, oftentimes they get so passionate about what it is that they're working on, they kind of forget that. But given the market and where we're at, I mean, it's a consistent message that I've heard is that one, the investors are asking for more information. They want to know more about what does the end look like, but also they want to know that you're focused, especially.
Yeah, and it's great to have a big vision at the end, but you can pitch that vision closer to the end of the deck, but show them that you have clear path to begin with. So
Yeah, it's so important. Well, Oksana, thank you so much for coming back on the Life Science Success Podcast and for sharing that with us. And yeah, thanks a lot for being here.
my pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thank you.